And I'd like to welcome everyone here to this Cornwall connectivity meeting. We thought, as this issue has come up repeatedly at the Board of Selectmen meeting, we thought we'd have a community forum to talk about the various aspects that are involved with community connectivity, some of the proposals that people are researching. And we thought we'd have a small meeting, and then as this is sort of snowball, and we're very fortunate tonight to have some of the best people that are working on this program, various aspects of it in the state. The focus is initially what makes sense for a town like Cornwall, which is small in numbers, sparsely populated. I think we're the last town to get cable television, and there's a reason for that economically, but also it in some ways puts it at a disadvantage to other places, and we do not want to be a disconnected town because increasingly the world is getting smaller, and we want to continue to be able to plug into communication systems that will allow our residents, our businesses to work from home, to have all the things that being plugged in can give us. At the same time, people have raised concerns about the environmental impact of some of these technologies, so we'll hear some of that tonight. Also, where we're at with the town, the last time there was a big telecommunications issue in town was when a tower was proposed for the Poplar Swamp area almost 10 years ago. The tower was built, but no antennas ever gone on it. So again, in a quirky Cornwall way, that was the last big thing that happened here. The latest thing that's happened is there have been some microcells deployed throughout town, and we're a little bit in the dark about what systems those are being plugged into, but you may have noticed little boxes on the cable lines about every 500 feet on all town and state roads throughout town. So that, again, is a new technology, but I'm working with Representative Horn on trying to find out who's doing that and what the impacts are to people. There was supposed to be notification to the town and to residents of those boxes going up, and I know some of them are very close to houses, so people are concerned about that. And I'm just curious, is anybody here in Cornwall, did anybody get any notification from any utility company that they were going to put a microcell near your house? Anybody get any notification? So the town, there's one, if you want to see what I'm talking about, on the pole down the road from the town hall right here on Pine Street. There's a little box with a red light on it. That's what we think we're talking about. So again, we're going to hear a little bit more about that. And again, we're here to have a good discussion, and again, thank the speakers who've come from in some cases from a long distance to be with us tonight. And again, we're going to start with Maria Horn, our representative of the 64th District, who's been very involved with many issues, including these in the district. She's going to Sharon at 8 o'clock to be inducted into the Grange, so she gets to bat first. But again, I've been working with her, and we actually had a conversation with the Commissioner of the Public Utility Regulatory Agency this week, so she has some updates about that. Again, thanks to Kim Maxwell from Norfolk, from President of Northwest Connect for coming. David Carpenter came all the way from the University of Albany to be with us tonight. Dan Reese is working on a comprehensive economic development strategy for the Northwestern Council of Governments, so he's going to tell us a bit of the regional perspective. And last but not least, Bill Valley, who also has to leave around 8 o'clock, is the statewide broadband policy coordinator for Connecticut Broadband Office of the Consumer Council. So again, Bill's been involved with this issue for quite a while, and we look forward to his presentation. So anyway, we'll take a seat, and again, there'll be plenty of times we're trying to go through all the presentations first, and then everybody will get a chance to ask questions. If you have questions specific to Maria or to Bill, please ask them first because they have a time constraint on coming. But I would like to introduce our representative, Maria Horn.
Thank you, Gordon. I am sorry that I have to leave at 8 o'clock, but I know that many of you will be in touch with me about the rest of the conversation. I have had the great privilege of meeting with quite a few of you in the room on this topic in general as I have been working on this issue. And one of the reasons why I have been working on this issue is typified by a phone call that I got in the last couple of weeks, which was from a woman who relocated to the community pretty recently, whose young daughter actually worked on my campaign. And they had just bought a house, and she and her husband are both freelancers, and they assumed that they would be connected and have access to internet. They moved into the house, they realized they did not, or they had a very low level of service. And they're in a panic because they're exactly the kind of family that we want to relocate to this area when we talk about wanting to bring young families with kids for our schools, to rebuild those schools, to run small businesses out of their home that have a low environmental impact. We need to be able to keep and attract and keep those kinds of families here. And if we can't connect them to a broader world, it's a real problem for our economy, for our schools, for healthcare, for all kinds of things. So this is one of the many reasons that I have been working on this issue, and trying to think about how the necessity of having a high-speed connection. We need a connection today in order to function. Pretty much most businesses do, and very quickly around the corner, we're going to need higher speeds in order to do the work that is going to be necessitated by the businesses of the future. So we need to be creative about how we get from here to there, and there are many ways to do that. And that's one of the many reasons why I've been speaking with many of you about how to pursue that. And in particular, I have been looking at ways, trying to figure out different ways that municipalities can have the ability to figure that out on their own, because it's going to be challenging. And I wanted to touch on what Gordon mentioned a minute ago in terms of specifics, that conversation that we had with the Public Utility Regulatory Authority, including the Commissioner, this week about the small cell transmitters that have seemed to have gone up in Cornwall recently. And Gordon, you may have mentioned this, but one of the things that we determined from that conversation is that they are required to give notice, and it appears that notice has not been given. So they're looking into their records. Gordon and others are double checking to see what's happened on our end. But we're relying on you to report on what's happening so that we can make sure that the incumbent providers are doing what they're meant to be doing in terms of notice to us, and so that we can shepherd this process in a way that makes sense for our communities and makes us all feel safe. And I want to just reiterate, again, my thanks to Gordon for pulling this particular group together, because the more information we have about this, and the more that we can have a conversation and look at the data and figure out what's right and what works for our communities, the better off we're going to be. So with that, I'm going to sit down because there's a lot of information to be shared tonight, and some of us on a tight schedule. But I'm very happy to be here and so grateful to Gordon for setting this up. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. I don't really want to give a political speech for her, but isn't she a great representative for us? Vote for her next time. I am president of Northwest Connect. We have been working on a regional fiber optic network for 4 years. We were formed by Roberto Willis, one of Maria's predecessors. We've come to the view, it took us a while actually, to realize that we have to start treating fiber optic networks or networking generally as a utility. How many people here have cell phones? How many people here would give them up? 1, 2.
Some of us never fell in a trap.
They become part of our lives, right?
Would you speak louder, please?
They become part of our lives. The internet has become part of our lives. And we have to think of the broadband system that connects the internet to our cell phones, our laptops, our systems in the home as utilities. It's critical that they become treated as we treat roads, as we treat electricity, as we treat water. These utilities have one mark. They have to be accessible to everybody at an affordable price. They can't be accessible to those people who can afford it, or those people who have to be passed by a particular network. In our region, 65% of the homes are connected to a Comcast or other cable television network. 35% are not. Those 35% do not have broadband by any standard today. 35%. 8% of them, 6,000 homes, don't have anything at all. Nothing. I suspect there's some in Cornwall that are in that state. How many of you have Frontier and DSL? Do you like it? Okay. It does, it's not bad. But it's not going to be the future, and it isn't getting any faster, guaranteed. If we try to start to think of these things as a utility, then we have to start thinking about what it is that makes us want roads. And we've been working on a business model that we're now trying to work through its basic contortions in Norfolk that asks the community to own the wire on the poles. If you're in an urban area, the wire on the poles per home is relatively cheap because so many homes are supported by one telephone pole. It can be $200 or $300 a home compared to the $1,000 it costs to bring the wire from the home to the pole. Here, it's more like $2,500 to pass every home because we have so few of them. That's a big home. And that means that no private party can come in here. Comcast, Frontier, AT&T, Verizon can make any money doing a full network for our region, period. We have to do some of it ourselves. We are recommending, we're trying to work this out in Norfolk, that the community own the material on the poles. If it's just the wire, you can get 40-year terms. And Cornwall can be connected for $20 a month per home, period. You're probably spending $100 a month per home on road maintenance. You're certainly spending over $400 a month per home on education. This is not a lot of money. But we have to accept the fact that it is, in fact, money paid for by the communities for an essential utility. Otherwise, it isn't going to happen. Nobody's going to come in here and do it for us. And because we have so much cable television here, we're never getting any money out of the federal government. Never. Now, I have some papers back there on this general idea, on the legal situation that Maria alluded to, on why we're not going to get solved, this problem isn't going to get solved by 5G, and a paper on radiation. And partly because of our next speaker, I want to speak a little bit about radiation. We are surrounded by electromagnetic radiation. Anybody here not have a Wi-Fi at home? 2, good. Anybody here have a cordless telephone? Anybody here use Bluetooth? Anybody here have a remote to their garage door? Those are all in frequency ranges exactly the same as your microwave oven. If you put your head in the microwave oven and close the door, if you could do that, you'd be dead at 1,000 watts, right? Here's the distribution of power in the world we live in. At 1,000 watts, we have the top power of a microwave oven. Nobody wants to be there. At 100 watts, we have the power of a remote cell tower. Roughly. It goes from 40 to about 100 watts of power. That's so they can get enough power to a phone 20 miles away. The small cell antenna, which may have been installed here, tend to have powers in the 12 to 14 watt range because they don't have much range. And they reduce the number of power because the idea of an antenna is to produce the same amount of power at the user as any other antenna. The little black line going down is the FCC definition of what power cannot be from a cell phone. Anything over that line to the right, is illegal. You can actually find out what your maximum power is on your cell phone if you figure out how to use it. It's simple. The next line, this one, is the actual amount of power that your cell phone produces. 2 watts is maximum. It can be as low as 10 milliwatts. Why the variation? Your cell phone, the most significant aspect of the cell phone's power on the battery is the power transmitted. So it wants to reduce the power as much as possible. It measures the incoming power The higher the incoming power, 4G, 4 bars, 3 doors, means that the cell phone will produce the least amount of power. The least. So if you have 4G, if you have a 4-bar system, you're probably transmitting more like -20 or -30 dBm rather than a watt. I'm talking about 10 milliwatts. In urban areas, studies have been done on this. The average speed, the average transmit power is around here, low end, because there's so many antennas. In rural areas, ours, it tends to concentrate up here because their antennas are so far away. What we really want are a lot of small cell antennas that are suitably regulated. And we want them because we then can operate in this range when our cell phone is stacked to our head and putting energy into our brain. The lower the energy, the less the danger. Now, the other thing is, this is the Wi-Fi. You have a Wi-Fi in your house. These are the range of frequencies that your Wi-Fi is experiencing. If you have a cordless phone, frequencies. What is your phone receiving? It's down here. It's nothing. It starts at -50 dBm. -50 dBm is 100 microwatts, not milliwatts, microwatts. You have to get within 2 or 3 feet of a cell phone antenna to be in danger of anything. 30 feet from a cell phone antenna, the power level is 1% of what the cell phone actually generates, 30 feet. I'm not saying put 5G antennas or 4G antennas everywhere. You have to be careful about where they're placed. But there's no reason to think they're bad if they're placed properly, and they clearly bring a benefit in energy absorption by our human body, because the closer you are to an antenna, the less cell phone power comes into your head. Now, that's all I have to say about that. I want to finish with I've been doing this for a long time, and the crucial issue, and the only issue, really, we know how to build these things. We know how much they cost. This is not technology that was invented yesterday. It was invented in the 1980s. The real question is, are we, communities, willing to pay for it? It's a utility, we should be willing to pay for it. We're going to have to pay for it. If we want to move to the next generation, if we want all the benefits that come from a fiber optic network or a rich broadband network, it has to be ours, just like we pay for roads, just like we pay for schools, just like we pay for water systems. Thank you very much.
Brad, did you want to introduce the next speaker?
Yeah, just wanted to introduce our next speaker and let you know how this came about. We started to see these small cells go up, spoke to Gordon. It's a great idea that we're sharing a lot more information here now, because this is a real and present important issue, obviously. It's not one thing. It's a complex issue with many aspects. And we all have our priorities about different aspects of this issue. But we can't be in denial about any one aspect of the issue. To carry this out in the most efficient and safe way, we have to be knowledgeable and pay attention to each aspect of the issue. And just so happens, Meg and I are involved in the health and environmental aspects of the issue. So we asked Dr. David Carpenter to come and be part of this panel tonight. He's a public health physician, director of the Institute of Health and Environment at the University of Albany. He's a professor there as well. He got his MD degree from Harvard, and then he went into research positions within the Armed Forces Radiobiology Research Institute. He came back to Albany as director of the Wadsworth Center for Laboratories, which is the 3rd largest public health laboratory in the US after the NIH and CDC. He created and is the founding dean of the School of Public Health at University of Albany in New York. His research is focused on many things over time: radio frequency radiation and electromagnetic fields from power lines. I didn't find this out until this evening, has authored more than 430 peer-reviewed publications and edited 5 books. That impressed me. So anyway, he's a spokesperson for New York. We asked him to come here. He's been on the President's Council for Cancer and Human Health, on both with regard to power lines and radio frequency electromagnetic fields. And it's nice to know that we can count on an individual to shed some light and contribute to our comprehensive idea about how to carry our goals out. So, David Carpenter.
Thanks, Brad. I don't know that I especially needed an introduction, but I appreciate it.
I enjoyed it.
Let me make one point very clear. I'm an educator, and there is no question but every home needs access to the internet. And every child needs to have access to the web to learn. That's not in question. What is in question is whether wireless action is better than wired. If you have wired connections through fiber optic or through cable, there is no radio frequency radiation that the body is exposed to. Now let me start by talking a little bit about 5G. We have basically as you've already heard, these things are being spread around the world, and I get emails continuously from Australia, from Europe. All over the world, 5G has been being implemented without people's knowledge or permission. And that's not right. And when people start putting little mini towers in front of your house, you have a right to ask why. The industry is not well regulated. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, does not regulate mini cell towers. Now, my concern is human health. I really cannot say anything much about health hazards of 5G because it's not been around long enough for anybody to be exposed to it for a long period of time. When you go through an airport scanner to see if you have guns or knives in your pocket, that's 5G. You're in there maybe, 15 seconds? When this is rolled out and you have these mini cell towers in every street, in front of every sidewalk, you're going to be continuously exposed to that level of radiation. My argument is until we know that there's no adverse health effect of 5G, we should not be rolling it out. Now, we know a lot about the health effects of 3G and 4G. And that includes Wi-Fi, cell phones, GPS, your garage opener, everything. We know that there are diseases that people get from excessive exposure. And let me go through those, because the real issue here, as we expand exposure, we are going to increase the risk for all of those diseases that are already documented from 3G and 4G. The frequency may make a difference. I'm not saying it doesn't, because we don't really know. There's more energy in millimeter waves than there is in the old 3G and 4G. And in general, the energy is correlated with the hazard. But there needs to be more study. All right, so what are the adverse health effects of 3G and 4G? Much of the information we have comes from people that have used cell phones for a long period of time. Cell phones were invented in the US, but they were first marketed well in Europe, especially in Scandinavia. So a lot of our evidence comes from there, but also in other countries. People that use cell phones held to their head for long hours, for long periods of time, are at greatly elevated risk of brain cancer. And not just any cancer, but particularly gliomas and the worst cancer, glioblastoma. That's what killed John McCain, Ted Kennedy, Beau Biden, Johnny Cochran. It's a horrible brain cancer. Its rates are rising around the world, even though in general other forms of brain cancer are decreasing. Now, there is evidence from Scandinavia that the latency between exposure and developing a brain cancer for adults is at least 10 years. And we know from other sources of brain cancer, often the latency is 20, 30 years. But younger people that start using their cell phone held to their head earlier seem to have a shorter latency for development of brain cancer. And that's why I, as a public health physician, am particularly concerned about the wide exposure to radiofrequency radiation of our kids. Now, nobody's demonstrated cancer of the thumb, so texting probably is not so bad. If you look in the fine print in your cell phone, it says, don't hold this closer to your head than about 1 inch, 2 centimeters. Nobody looks at that. That's the cell phone companies trying to say when your brain cancer occurs, it's your fault because you didn't pay attention. I've got a cell phone. I don't have it on most of the time. I use it when I travel. I'm not opposed to technology. I'm opposed to technology that hasn't been proven safe and for which there are not advisories on how individuals can reduce their exposure and therefore reduce the risk of disease. Now, there are other cancers that have been demonstrated from cell phones. There's a clear elevation in rates of breast cancer in women wear their active cell phone in their bra. And I was telling someone tonight, I was horrified to see my daughter, who's a horse reproductive veterinarian, put her cell phone in her bra because it's convenient when you have to use your hands. But it's dangerous, and breast cancer is the major cancer in women. There haven't been a lot of other studies on breast cancer just from being in Wi-Fi environments or certainly being around a 5G environment, but I'm concerned about that. Now, there also is strong evidence, and this may not worry most of the people in this audience that are relatively old, but strong evidence that if you have a wireless laptop on your lap for several hours, you probably don't need to wear a condom for the next few days because it reduces sperm counts. And effects on fertility are a major problem. Sperm counts in men in developed countries are going down. I'm not saying it's all due to wireless laptops, but that's certainly a contributing factor. Then finally, there's an increasing incidence of a disease we call electrical hypersensitivity. This is poorly understood. It still is debated because most physicians, when a patient comes to them with constant headaches and a feeling of weakness and that their brain isn't working quite right, they'll send them to a psychiatrist. But it's a real syndrome. It's not a psychiatric disease. And it's caused by unusual sensitivity to radiofrequency radiation. There's debates about what the frequency of this is in the general population. It's of the order now, probably of the order of 5%, but it's growing. And individuals become sensitive to radiofrequency radiation probably never cease to be somewhat sensitive. The symptoms may decline if they no longer are in areas of high exposure. But when they are exposed again, the symptoms of brain fog, of headache, photophobia, weakness, fatigue, they come. And as we increase our exposure, we are going to see the syndrome of electrical hypersensitivity more and more. All right, so, this hasn't been studied with regard to 5G, but we have definitive evidence on 3G and 4G. Now, don't get the idea that I'm opposed to technology. I'm not. I use technology all the time. I'm opposed to technology that is not safe, that can't be provided in a safe fashion for everybody. Let me repeat what I said first. Wired connections, whether cable or fiber optic, generate no radio frequency radiation. The comments that were just made that this is all below the FCC standard, that is absolute nonsense. That FCC standard is based on protecting you from the microwave oven effect. It's set only on the basis of not causing tissue heating. All of these things that I've talked about are symptoms that occur, the cancers, the decreased fertility, the electrical hypersensitivity. They occur at intensities way below that FCC standard. So don't hang your hat on that FCC standard. The FCC is basically an outcropping of the communications industry. The commissioners all come from there. I would just urge you to demand that there be careful discussion of the adverse health effects of wireless communication. It may cost a little more to generate wired lines, but the long-term cost of the adverse health effects from ignoring the evidence that we have for hazard is going to vastly outweigh any setup costs of putting in wired connections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gordon. Note of personal privilege first. Some years ago, as a young aide to El Abrazo, I took my wife on our first date to Cornwall Bridge, and we now have 6 kids and 11 grandchildren, and I was told over the weekend I'm about to be a great-grandfather, and the whole family refers to this as the Cornwall Karma. And I'd like to thank all of you for that, and also as a plea from Donna for you to maybe turn the Cornwall Karma to somebody else at this point in our family. But we feel truly blessed, and will forever remember and think of Cornwall as really part of our family. I want to speak for just a minute or two on some of the comments that were just delivered from a slightly different perspective. There are scores of studies regarding where in America communities have chosen to adopt high-speed broadband internet and fiber optic cable, and in some instances 5G is being talked about in a number of areas. Leverett, Massachusetts is one, Chattanooga, Tennessee is another one, just down the road in Washington, Connecticut. The community just approved at their town meeting, connecting town hall and the entire business district with high-speed broadband, and they are connecting through the Connecticut Education Network. It's happening all over for exactly the reasons that Representative Horn referred to, and that is that young people need an ability to be able to connect and do business with their employers, respecting their quality of life, near their families, and don't have to worry about not being able to upload large files, which is one of the major problems that many of them have. To Kim's point, when you think about these things, for 9 years I served as finance board chairman down in Fairfield, and when you think of this and think of it like a road, it really is a good analogy, except roads are costing way more money, especially up here in Connecticut, because you not only have the ongoing annual road maintenance bills, but every time there's a pothole and somebody drives through it, you've got repairs on your own that you've got to do to your car. You've also got issues of salt and salt maintenance and what that does to the exhaust system. Used cars from Connecticut do not command the kind of premium that other used cars do because of the damage that our roads and our salt and everything else that we have to put on them in order to drive around to get to work, something the young people don't want to do. And many of us who are not young people anymore don't want to do if we don't have to. Those are huge expenses, many of them hidden and not reported because the families take them on themselves. And it's something to consider when you start to think about this as a community resource. Communities are taking this on. There are a number of different ways to secure financing with all this, but I want to talk about one particular community in general, which is a large one. But I spent over a decade in Southeast Asia, and this was following El Abrazo's death. I was working in Singapore and Vietnam. John McCain, by the way, I don't think died from this. One visit to the Hanoi Hilton, there may be some other reasons that you'll see for that. But having said that, Singapore in the early 2000s, which was about the size of Connecticut, it's got 3 million people. Its GDP was not much more than Connecticut in 1980. Made a commitment that every single citizen in their state was going to have high-speed internet. They now have the fastest internet in the world. They made two commitments, one for high-speed internet and the other one to education. Their kids are at the top of every single standardized test score, university, high school, elementary school, middle school in the world. And people go to Singapore to do business because of the internet, because Singapore has nothing. They don't even have their own water supply. They have no natural resources. They have nothing. They have no land for factories. The entire economy is built on their connectivity to the rest of the world. And that's how they made it. Their GDP right now is 9 times that of Connecticut. In 1980, it was the same. Their population now is twice the size of Connecticut. In 1980, it was the same. All those things we can control here through zoning and for other things. But they did it because they made a commitment that the people in their city, surrounded on all sides by 2 of the largest Muslim populations in the world, they do business with the world, and they've grown their economy stupendously because of it. Now that's 3 million people. It's not Cornwall, but they had nothing else to depend on. Here we have one of the most historic places in the planet, and an incredible geography, an incredible history, an incredible spirit, an incredible community, and all sorts of reasons that Singapore never had. I don't remember reading the health effects of Wi-Fi in Singapore, but the entire country has it. And I've looked through Straits Times and all of those articles, and for the 6 million people that now live there, I did not see a study that referred to Wi-Fi as a cause for anything. But they have a pretty good medical system, so I could be wrong. But having said that, I do thank Gordon and all of you for considering this issue carefully. It's very, very important, but the analogy of thinking about it like a road is a very good one, because these are the roads of the future. Our kids will want to ride on those and not the ones that are out there now. Thank you.
Okay. We have Bill Valley.
Bill Valley, state broadband guy. So I'm the guy from the state, I'm here to help. I commend all of you for being here. It's incredibly important. I travel the state all the time. I always say my constituency is 169 towns. Now, our state rep has a few towns and she represents them very well, and more to the point than I do. But I listen to towns all the time, and if you go to the high schools in our urban areas, a third of those kids do not have internet in their homes. That's nuts. That's gotta end. That's no good. I mean, you have flipped classrooms these days, you know, where the kids are actually doing the classwork at home, and they go to class to discuss it and to iron it out with their colleagues. That's a great method, and it's working terrific. It's just if you don't have internet at home, you don't get in that working group where the other kids are. Healthcare, we're talking about health here at great length, and there is no greater purpose that I'm aware of for affordable broadband internet access than healthcare. That's where you really see the action. We're talking about the machines that Dr. Dortmund deals with. Those things are miracles. It's amazing. But the idea of folks out in this way, and I always say the Northwest corner is you're the hottest area in the state, because municipalities are where this all starts. It doesn't start with the state, and I got news for you, it's not going to start in Washington anytime soon. So if anybody's waiting for that to happen, it isn't going to happen. It's like electricity a century ago. High-cost areas don't get served first. It's like a bulletin, and there's no way around it. I mean, Sharon, Connecticut, I was there recently with Jessica. I talked to the town historian. I said, well, when did you get out of dirt roads? When did you get paved roads? In 1923. I grew up in Manhattan. Trust me, in 1923, there were a few farm roads in New York. It takes time to roll this type of thing out. It's expensive. You're a high-cost area. Urban areas that I also deal with, also. Deserts. They don't have it because these providers are not coming here. We can talk about 5G all day. But earlier this year, Maria and I were in an Energy and Technology Committee meeting at the legislature, the LOB, and it was entirely devoted to what are the incumbents going to do this year. And the president of AT&T, who I've known for many years, straight shooter, but he's running a business, said there was, in response to a question from a committee member, a state rep, when are you coming to rural? What are you going to do about rural in our state? He said, nothing. We're not going to rural. We can't make any money out there. We're not going to be there, so don't hold your breath. It's going to be a monopole on top of the hill someplace. That's the best you get. So worry about it? Fine. Think about it. I don't know anything about radiation. I'm a public policy wonk. That's what I do for a living. The small cells are bumping around all the thing. About 12, 13 years ago, I was actually the one who set up the notice requirements that are not being observed. A lot of that's pure. Unfortunately, the state is just not working. I'm from the state, I can tell you. You know, the governor has got a good heart, I'm sure, but he's not focused on this issue. The legislature, we got quite a time with the legislature this year, notwithstanding Maria's efforts and Jessica and Roberta Willis, who's been a champion. She got me into the broadband thing. I was a telephone guy a million years ago, it feels like. In spite of great efforts, and I mean just daily, you've got to do this for the people. The thing listed on here is the municipal gain. I urge you to research this, put in municipal gain, Connecticut municipal gain. You will find it's a unique Connecticut asset. It gives every town, 169 towns, have a right to get on a pole and put up a fiber line. You should do that. However, the incumbents won't let you do it because they're the gatekeepers to getting on a pole. So why would they do what? Why would they stop us? We're nice people. We want the electricity of the 21st century. Well, you'd be in competition with them. And I mean, AT&T, speaking of that company, I mean, their profits for almost 15 years now have been $5 billion a quarter. And that's a flat line. That's net income. That's the money you put in your pocket after you pay all your expenses. Do you deserve that? Out here, I mean, someone mentioned there's not a lot of young people. I'm not young. I'm a grandfather and I'm retiring, so. Where are the young people? You know, the whole thing, our biggest exports, the high school students and the old people who are here to visit their parents. I've heard all that, and unfortunately it's true. I see it across the state. They're not here because, I have 2 kids. Neither of them ever they graduated college and they're gone. They're in other states. And I don't want to see that. It's so gorgeous up here. It's incredible. I live in Avon, it's an hour or so away from here. It's a pretty kind of place. But whoop, you should come out here. It's wow. And the history, everything about it, it's phenomenal. I grew up in Manhattan. I said that earlier. I spent more time up here when I lived in Manhattan than I have since I've lived in Avon. I come over to hike the trail. It all starts with you. You know, when I talk about municipal leadership, it's municipal and it's leadership. What it really translates into is champions. If you don't champion this thing, and I'm only talking fiber. I truly believe what you need is fiber. We talk about 5G all day again. 5G totally depends on you having fiber. If you don't have fiber, you got no fiber. So you start with the fiber. Fiber it's limitless. I mean, the copper's been up on the pole since 1876 when Graham Bell said, come up here and watch it, I need you. Okay, but the copper's on its day. Right now, the copper company, Frontier, is kind of in the soup because they're still selling typewriters in a digital age when everybody's got, a computer in their pocket. That's time. It's like the electric story. You are the living electric story. It either starts with you and your champions, your state reps, your town selectmen, Gordon, doing a great job. They get it. I've been in the broadband business for over 10 years. And when I started, the question I got all the time from my municipal constituents was, what's broadband? Now it's not what's broadband. I know what broadband is. How do I get it? What do we do? My vision has been for 10 years. You need a fiber line to every premise. It's just like electricity. You walk into a dark room, what's the first thing you do? You flip that switch because you know it'll be there and you know the power will come on. Everywhere you go, you need to have this thing. Kim said it's not a luxury. This isn't a luxury. They treat it as a luxury. That's why they have $5 billion in net profits every quarter. It shouldn't be priced that way. When Google Fiber did its experiment, they were selling for $100. $100. I did a focus group got to be 5 years ago in New Haven. I did it in a number of cities. And this young guy gets up and says, well, I got this incredible business. It turned out he was a guy in Cornwallct who did a data center. He sold for $1 billion. So the guy, I guess, knew what he was talking about. So I kept saying, well, you can't buy a game. It was 5 years ago. And this guy gets up to ask a question, and he says, I can buy a game. Charter sell it to me for $10,000. But you know why? I talked them down to $6,000 a month. He was happy about that. You can today buy it, not in Connecticut, for $100 a month. So, every champion here, do it. Get yourself fiber. Fiber to the premise, everywhere. Otherwise, and then, if you do that, digital divide goes away because everybody's got access. Homework gap disappears because the kids can study. And healthcare, you don't have to go to Hartford. The doctor can be right there on your monitor. Think of that. Do it. Thanks a million.
Okay, but before we open up to questions, I did ask Bill before he goes to go down the list of questions, because people that are on the entry level like me often hear terms around this issue that are sometimes used interchangeably and sometimes used incorrectly. So I just thought if nothing else, tonight we would establish a baseline and maybe there'd be even discussion about this as far as what are all these, a simple definition of fiber optic broadband 5G, because I'd say half the audience here probably isn't, I'd say most people here aren't as conversant as people up on the stage, except for me.
Well, I apologize for having to leave. My wife is coming with an illness that I really have to. It's one reason I'm retired. That's the good part of it. Otherwise, it's not good. The list, quickly, I will run through. And I wrote at the bottom, youth. Because youth is a key issue to this thing. Because they're the ones it's not on the list, but it is now. Fiber optics, options. I assume that means as to getting fiber optics. Again, the United States does have, United States Rural Department of Agriculture, the USDA, does have funding. Unfortunately, this area, I have traditionally said since about 2009 when I started doing grants on behalf of the state and entities within the state for federal money that you can't get, there's no rural in this state. We also don't have any metropolitan areas. We're basically, in federal rules, we are basically a suburban state. So it's very difficult. I have spoken with USD people in the recent past, and Jessica's been talking to them at great length for quite a while now. There are new funds being created, some of which I don't think this area could get a grant. It's possible you could get a loan. In talking to them, generally I'll say I'm from Connecticut, and I'll say, well, that's nice, but I'm also thinking about Wyoming. So it's like, ooh, I guess I'm not going to go with that. Again, I think that Northwest Connect has terrific ideas. There is going to be a funding aspect. If you think of this area, it is subsidy. You need a subsidy. Unfortunately, the United States is not going to do it. And as I mentioned, the state is not in the greatest financial shape, as you ever know. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of, I suppose the income, it's a small, densely packed state. And so you have basically two providers, a cable company and a telephone company, SNET, S&T, Frontier. And they have no interest in really dealing with this issue because they have very high sunk costs. In other words, SNET has a ton of copper, $2 billion worth of copper on their books. It's sunk cost, it's money they've spent. It's like their house poor or farm poor. It's the same idea. They just don't have, there's no way to get out from that expense and then start a new one, the fiber thing. They'd have to be able to write it off. The United States could possibly do that. So there's lots of ramifications. I urge you to talk among yourselves and see what can be happened. There are lots of little groups that hang wire for people, and I would start at the town green. Start with the Connecticut Education Network. It was nicely mentioned by Dan. I don't know this town that well, but Town Hall undoubtedly has a POP or a point of presence from. I'm on the board of the CEN. And have been for a long time, and it's a fabulous asset. It is a state asset, and you can jump off that to thrive in the premise. Broadband. The way I don't like to talk about speed because the incumbents can always come back and say, well, we've got that speed. Or they can say, There's fiber all across this state. It's 90% covered. I don't dispute that number. I think Washington, D.C. is first. Delaware maybe is in there too. And the reason is that we're a transit area. We're Bosnia-Wash. We're between Boston, New York. We're Boston, New York. Bosnia-Wash goes down. Boston, New York, and Washington. It's an economic term. And so there's a huge amount of transit. So picture a freeway or a highway or whatever you want to call it, superhighway, running from Boston to New York. You're sitting on it. Not so much in this corner, but in the middle of the golden banana. And so that's what they're talking about. They're talking about state roads, like the Sharon Hospital. Did a study up in the hospital to see what have they got. Well, up in the ceiling in the electric closet, we could see there's fiber lines. We're trying. Where do they come from? What are they doing? They were transiting over from Torrington to Poughkeepsie. It's the only hospital in between. So but it's not for sale. I said earlier, you can't buy a gig, and the young guy got up. Well, he's a business guy. He can buy it, but he can also spend $5,000 a month. So my term for it is affordable broadband internet access. And that does not include fiber, cellular. The 5G thing, first of all, it's a myth. It's a myth that the companies are using to attract money from Wall Street. They're also doing a land grab off of you. The municipalities right now have authority in the public rights of way. And what they want to do is get themselves unfettered access to the public rights of way. And the FCC has just issued an order saying, yeah, you can have that. So be wary of that too, and you'll be hearing stuff in the media on that. Microsoft, that's the same thing. Municipal gain, I think I mentioned briefly, the health effects, I don't know, I'm not on. And state and regional plans. The only regional plan I know is the one you're in the middle of, which is Northwest Connecticut.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Will we take questions for you?
Oh, yep. Well, Bill has to, if Bill has to go also, but if there's a couple of questions just for Bill, and again, thank everybody for their patience, and we'll have everybody ask one question before they ask a second. So here's Bill. It's got to go, but a couple quick questions. Is there really a question? Is there a question? Yes.
Is there a state inventory for any of the dark fiber that we've got?
Very good question, and thank you for that. The answer is absolutely not. The providers own... What? Oh, absolutely. No, that's, Is there a map of fiber?
Dark fiber.
Dark, is there a map of any fiber? The answer is no. It's because we lit, dark, or in between. And the reason is that all the fiber is owned by... Actually, you can see the state fiber, and that would be the CEN. But that basically goes to all municipalities. It's a municipal thing. And so any town that has CEN, all towns have something from CEN. A well-equipped town would have a town hall, one educational facility, usually the high school or the Board of Ed, one library, some towns, like New Haven has 5, they'll have 1. And so it's town hall, library, educational facility, and police and fire. So, and you can jump off any one of those 5 nodes at cost. And again, it's a state asset, so you would be paying that. And lots of towns, New Haven's doing it, a lot of towns do, first place to start is maybe do the town green, and the next place after that would be to do all town facilities. Just hook them up. Now all of a sudden you're starting a little rain, if you can see, and then you start jumping off of each node like that.
I think I was trying to get to the dark fiber that is going like right through the center of Cornwall, for instance, and all the way up with 45 through Warren, that's unused.
Yes, that's the fiber I was talking about. That's transit fiber, and it's like a freeway with no entrance or exits.
Who owns?
Lots of companies own it. Frontier owns a lot of it.
Right.
Comcast owns some of it. Level 3, lots of companies you've never heard of because they will not do municipality at all. They'll be doing like Aetna or big healthcare facilities, global. Crown Castle owns a lot of it, and Crown Castle actually owns the state fund. Any other questions for me?
Can I ask another one?
Sure, quickly.
Okay.
Quick one, and I'll be quicker in answer.
Okay, T-Mobile and Sprint are advertising their primary market as being in rural communities versus AT&T and Verizon. I didn't know if you were aware of it.
I'm not big on cell phones. Cellular is the phone in your pocket is not a phone. It's a wireless device. This gentleman can tell you even better. It's radio. So it's regulated as radio. So it's only regulated by the FCC and very lightly.
You mentioned that.
One more.
I'm saying
Thank you, Bill.
The U.S. Telecom, which is the largest lobbying organization for AT&T and Verizon, and the NTCA, which is the largest lobbying organization for the cable TV companies, have openly admitted in the last 3 or 4 months that the rural communities cannot, no private company can make money in the rural communities. And what Sprint and T-Mobile are doing is trying to leverage federal funding. They're not going to do it on their own nickel. And neither of them have actually the money to put a 5G network into the rest of the country. It's very expensive. And I should say something about 5G. It's been the most overhyped experience I've ever seen. The stuff that's going in now is a very small percentage of what 5G is supposed to ultimately be. They're talking about data rates at 10 gigabits, they're talking about latencies of 1 millisecond, they're talking about 50,000 devices connected to one antenna. And nobody knows how to make that kind of antenna yet. But 5G only works with fiber cabling. You have to have the antennas close. The higher the frequency of the antenna, the closer you have to get, because the frequencies don't go through windows, they don't go as far. And they're talking about frequencies that are 100 times larger than the ones they're using now. In order to do that, you've got to have antennas that are 300 or 400 feet apart. Now, that's not going to happen here, that's going to happen in urban areas, but here you're still talking about needing them maybe a quarter of a mile apart. And you can only do that if you've got fiber optics. It takes 3 or 4 years to do a fiber optic system from the start. And what they're trying to do is hype enough so they can get the funding and put on the balance sheet fiber optics so that they can actually, it takes 2 hours to install an antenna. It takes years between design, engineering, getting all the approvals, getting the poles set up, which is a year itself, and then putting the stuff on the poles. So they're trying to do that, and they have to do that in order to make 5G work at all. And they're very big cables because they need a lot of dark fiber to make the darn things work. That's their strategy. All 4 of them are actually asking for money from the government for rural fiber optics. There's been a lot of it. I mean, there are probably 400 rural utilities, phone companies or small phone companies and small phone electric utilities that already have fiber optics paid for by the government. It's probably a third of them in the country. But in order to get that, you have to prove that you're unserved. And if you've got Comcast here or any cable television company here, you're not unserved. There's also a requirement that you not overbuild any other network with federal funding. So even if you got money from the federal government, they would require that you only put it where Comcast isn't. And a lot of the point is to create some competition for Comcast. That brings the prices down. To me, 5G is going to happen in the rural community, in the urban areas over the next 10 years. It will happen. It will start burbling into the suburbs over the next 5 years. It will go into urban areas. It's actually nice. I mean, if you could put an antenna up and it gives gigabit services to everybody without having to go to the home, it's quicker, cheaper. But it isn't going to happen here. It's not going to happen here.
So one of the independent contractors was stringing fiber in Kent on Monday night.
I don't know, but there are literally
streaming
hundreds of
Monday
people.
night.
There are literally hundreds of companies that do independent copper fiber pulling.
There was something like coal fiber.
We can't hear. So, I find this ironic, talking
Hold on a minute. Let's, Jeff.
We cannot hear.
Okay.
Everything you guys are saying. So this is basic pipe string and tin can communication. We can't hear you guys.
Okay, we'll do our best to speak louder.
Talk more slowly too. because
Okay.
it echoes.
So, we'll work on our diction. Thank you.
These things are very loud to us, and so we're...
It might be better without the mic.
Yeah, that's why...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll try it without the mic. How about that?
Yeah.
All right, next question. Yes.
So I have a few questions. First of all, thank you for having this forum. And as someone, a youngish family moving to town with a young daughter, I just wanted to say that as opposed to what Representative Ford was saying, when I heard, thanks to the article, the news, the letter in the Lakeville Journal that I believe Brad and Meg did, that there were small cells going up in town, that actually had the opposite effect for us. My husband has a small business in town, and we've been considering and moving here more and more. And we're based in New York City, living here a lot, and we're planning at the time to move here permanently with our young daughter. And to hear that, and thank you to Professor Carpenter for bringing up the health issues, to hear that these small cells were going up was very disturbing and actually has given us a motivation to leave town. So it has the opposite effect. And another question, there's a lot of confusion being raised here about wired versus, what I don't understand, and I'd like to have this answered, is from what I understand, there's a lot of talk about people not being able to do their homework because they don't have internet. And people who are not doing their homework don't need fiber optic T1 technology. I mean, these kids, the small business that I do is a film company, and that's extremely data intensive. You're downloading gigabytes and gigabytes of media. I can do that with the optimum connection I have now. So I'm just wondering what we're talking about and why people aren't connected. And also, the other thing I understood is that companies had a statute under the law. We're supposed to wire everyone in town, and that hasn't been done. So why hasn't that been done? So these are all, we're talking about extremely fast speeds that most companies, I worked at a financial firm, there we needed T1 technology. We needed to have stock market prices done in milliseconds. But what are we talking about here that people need this kind of technology right now? And also, why aren't the people who have it? Why don't they have it? Is it because of cost or because they choose not to? So, because it seems to me that we are connected. The library has it, the town has it, everybody has cable. And they also have access to Wi-Fi, and they also can then connect their cell phone to that and get cell phone technology. And then the last point is that when they're putting these small cell towers up, I thought they needed permission from the town to do that. I know in the FCC, under the Trump admin in 2018, they rescinded some regulations that made it much easier for the companies to put this on without, but I still thought they needed, Mr. Ridgway, I still thought they needed permission from the town and to pay the town per pole. It's something like, used to be thousands of dollars, and now it's $200. So I'm just wondering why that hasn't happened. And I know the companies, when they put up the cell phone boxes, they're getting a kickback. Like the cable lines are getting about $500 to $1,000 per pole per month. Is that right? 200 to 5, like it's around that number. So every time you see this small cell tower, the phone company, the cable company who owns the lines are getting money per month. And why isn't that money going to the town? Those are all my questions.
I can answer that. They are not tied into, the town doesn't have any equipment on the poles right now. So they're, as far as I understand it, and we haven't fully established what those boxes are and who owns them, but we are.
They're new cells.
Well, that's what we think. But again, we're taking it with Representative Horn's leadership. She and I are looking into what are these boxes and who do they belong to, which you would think would be an easy question to get an answer to.
Yeah.
But I have talked to the power company and I haven't talked to the telephone company yet. But we're not getting to, we just started asking the questions this week. So we are getting down to the fact that if these are in the right of way, then they are regulated by an organization called the Public Utility Regulatory Commission, and we did talk to the chair, and he is going to investigate this particular issue for us.
I called Optimum and asked if they could remove them, and they said you can write a letter and have them removed. I'm not sure if that's true though.
Well, let me know what your answers are. So the answer to your last question was, this isn't the town equipment, and apparently the utilities can work amongst themselves and trade their access to the poles for a fee and upgrade the systems or add to this in the right-of-ways. What is interesting, as you said, is that they are supposed to come to the town. I get a lot of information every week, and so I'm not surprised that I might not have picked up on it, even though there's a pole right out here. So I'm supposed to be notified as a chief elected official, but also as adjacent property owner.
And I thought they were supposed to ask permission from the town.
Right. So, I mean, there's a whole process, an appeals process, so, and I do know someone here who has one outside his house, and he did not receive one or aware of being, so there might be a big issue there as far as the procedures may not have been followed when this was all put up.
And
So-
this is a prep to 5G, right? Because with 5G, you're gonna have to roll out it's been estimated 800,000 of these towers across the country because they can't go through walls and buildings, so they're gonna need these small cells. This is really for the wireless providers are doing this. It's not about broadband wire connection. This is the wire. These cell things are the wireless
Yes, we
providers,
believe this
right?
is for a wireless provider. But
Yeah.
again, apparently the wireless provider doesn't even have a lot of customers in town, so there's a lot of questions, but again, anybody else want to answer
Yeah,
more?
let me, the law says you have the right to control poles. The absolute
Microphone, in front of the microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, better.
Okay. The principal handicap to date for putting in antennas in towns has been the municipality saying, I don't want it, and mostly for health reasons, some for aesthetics. There are some towns in the country who have outlawed them. The FCC is trying very hard to create rules which eliminates the control of the municipality over the rules. Bill Valley mentioned one of them. It's happening now in Washington. There's a thing called over-the-air reception devices, OTARC. And when the rules were written a long time ago, they separated the antennas from the devices receiving the signals. Antennas are heavily regulated, the devices are not. That's why we can put them in our pocket and take them anywhere. They're trying to eliminate that rule by making the antennas look exactly like the cell phone so that people can put them anywhere without any control. This is really wrong. I mean, we may disagree about what the levels are to create, and there's a lot of science out there that goes all kinds of different directions, but there is a reason. The output of an antenna, small cell antenna, if you're hugging it, is dangerous. 30 feet from it, the power level is 1% of what it is on the antenna. And so where they probably are positioned is probably okay if you can accept 1%. You're down now in milliwatts. But the community should have a siting plan that says when anybody comes here to put an antenna in the right of way, there's some rules. And those rules have to cover where it goes and what the power level is and how the power level is going to be controlled over time and who pays for the administration of that. The federal government is trying to sabotage all of that. It's all in litigation right now, but I would advise you, Gordon, to look at this very seriously because, and it probably needs to be a kind of, more than you, but everybody in this region should get together over the next couple of months and figure out what siting rules look like. And then figure out how to find the lawyers that allow them to be completely yours, because it's going to be a battle. That's going to be a battle.
And can I just help you on that question a little bit? Is that okay?
Sure.
So the other thing that is going with that is that, from what I understand, there's a huge potential for data collection and surveillance in quotes, and that because there are going to be so many, there's a potential. There was a Wall Street Journal article about the sensors and everything that they can have, pollution sensors that can be in touch with insurance companies if you're smoking. That there's a huge, and right now they do collect data that we cannot stop at all. When you use your browser, you can't privacy do it unless you're a tech expert. So what is that? That's part of this, isn't it?
No,
Not at all.
you're correct. 5G they don't talk about this in the press, but 5G has protocols which allows a lot more information about how you use your cell phone to be collected automatically. There's also a much better system for locating, because the cell antennas are now so close together, they'll know exactly where you are. And so a record of every store you walk into, every booth you walk into, every bathroom you walked into is going to be recorded and uploaded into the sky, whether you like it or not. And that's built into the 5G protocol, not in the 4G protocol. It's one of the reasons they're promoting it, because the short-term revenues are not going to be in data use, it's going to be in collection of information. There's nothing you can do about it.
And are those precursors to 5G? Are those precursors?
No, those are not 5G antennas.
But are they going to, once they get them once they get the approval from the town to do that, I read that they can just do the next step.
The antenna business is very complicated. What they're installing now, the difference between 5G and 4G is the frequencies.
Right.
5G has one set of frequencies, 4G has another set of frequencies. Sprint, I believe, is responsible for these ones in your town, but most of what Verizon and AT&T are putting up now are dual antennas with radios for 4G and radios for 5G. But the radios for 5G are very low levels of 5G, low speeds compared to what they have to be, low latencies compared to what they have to be. And over time, they're going to have to replace all of them because nobody's invented the antenna yet that will do everything. But when they put them up, they will have the antennas, they will have the software for doing all of the surveillance and data collection that they will get from the ultimate systems. And we won't be able to do nothing we can do that, I don't think.
Okay, yes, here in front.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Carpenter for his work, which actually are these studies, the bioinitiative studies. Have you read them, sir? They're online. Bioinitiative,
I probably read
2012.
200 of those things.
Okay.
I've read them on both sides of the account. I can tell you that the FCC, the FDA, the National Cancer Society, the Center for Disease Studies does not agree with you.
They're ignoring a lot of science.
There are hundreds of studies that show that these
But they're funded by means. This is independent. This is an independent study. Dr. Carpenter has many studies right
here.
here.
A fair assessment.
I mean, they're right here. They're online.
Okay.
Anyone can read them.
I'd just like to say also this is billed as a meeting of community connectivity and we're not going to settle the health effect. We're not going to have a debate. We're not going to settle this thing. And again,
To my question though, who's going to carry the liability? Are you going to carry the liability if people get sick? Are you, sir? Who? Because Lloyd's of London will not insure the telecom industry. So I'm just asking, who's going to hold the liability for all of this?
that's a great question
It is
that we
a very
weren't
good
prepared to
question.
answer tonight. Yes, in the back. Judy?
Me?
Yes.
I hear the word or the acronym FTTH a lot, which translates to fiber to the home. And Mr. LaValle, is that his name, who just left? He spoke about fiber to the premises. Well, I think those are both probably euphemisms for fiber to the driveway. Because then, at that point, small cells are going to be placed at the driveway, creating a hotspot that will emit to the home to provide the home with service from that hotspot. So I just think it's important for the people to know that FTTH, fiber to the home, doesn't really mean to the structure. It means to the property line or to the driveway. And what we want is hardwired cable to the actual structure. And then people in their own homes can do what they choose with Wi-Fi. But if we only do FTTH according to the definition that's being used now, we're going to have hundreds of small cell hotspots throughout the community that we drive by that will be emitting, or close to other residences that will be emitting into other residences, which is a form of trespass. And as I understand, there are many lawsuits throughout the United States based just on that trespass.
Yeah, Fourth Amendment.
Okay. May I venture an idea that I believe some communities have wired right to the house? I don't think it's an either-or situation.
Who's wired to the house?
I believe some communities have wired fiber optic to the house, but that's just an amateur opinion. Is that true? There are places, I think we went up to the town of Mount Washington in Massachusetts, right over the border, I believe, is wired to the
Not
house.
everyone in Mount Washington is fiber to the house. Personally, know people who actually have enhancers, accelerators that they need all kinds of emitting equipment to get get them coverage, and they do not have fiber to their house, at all.
I take your description, but at least in my world, fiber to the home means to the home, inside the home. Every fiber system I know of that is called fiber to the home or fiber to the premises. Some people prefer premises because that means you would include businesses. Homes aren't businesses, but it's basically the same thing. It's a wire from the pole or a wire from under the street. It comes into the house. There's a thing called an optical network termination, ONT. There's a box that goes on the house that solidifies everything. The ONT is inside. It's a piece of electronics that converts optical signals to electrical signals. There's an Ethernet connection to it. There's a power supply and a battery for backup. That is the standard, as far as I know, absolutely. And everything I talk about or Northwest Connect talks about in terms of fiber optic networks is precisely that. Wire on the poles or underground, a little connector on the wire, a piece of fiber optic line that goes into the home. It doesn't necessarily, it goes into the home through an adapter box. It's called a NID, Network Interface Determination. And in the home is a small box, it's about the size of a cigarette pack now, that does all the conversion and talks to a Wi-Fi system in your house, and now you have a gigabit in your house or more.
So if you don't have Wi-Fi, you can't use the system you're talking about? Do you connect with your Ethernet cable, for example?
Well, today, almost every internet connection goes to a home Wi-Fi system.
Well, I'm asking if you don't have Wi-Fi, like, would you be able to connect, is it solely wired going into the...
Yeah, I mean, you could have, every one of these systems has an Ethernet hardwired connection. You could connect that to a TV or your computer if you wanted, but usually it gets connected to a Wi-Fi
So you can disable,
in your house.
you can disable the Wi-Fi signal completely and still have access to...
Oh, sure, yeah. Sure.
It's true.
Yeah.
Our house comes exactly as you described, into the home, through the box, no Wi-Fi whatsoever, hardwired cat cable to the computer, to the television, no radiation, the most fast, safe, secure, the only secure system, and it's the best, so why don't we have it? There we go.
He's absolutely right. The best system you can buy, you can do is to have the fiber coming into your house or a cable TV system coming into your house. There's basically an Ethernet breaks system or a distribution system, a little box about thin, maybe had 8 or 10 Ethernet connections on it, and you wire those to everything in your house that you want to connect to. The trouble is that you now have to put that wire everywhere you want to connect to. You can't add anything else until you want to. Things aren't very movable. And many of the things that you have, like your iMac now, doesn't have an Ethernet connection on it. So you have to now get a little device that does the thing.
They have ports, essentially, they have ports.
You can get little ports, yeah. But the world is organized now almost entirely around Wi-Fi. The presumption of Wi-Fi in the house.
Except that in these countries, like in Europe right now, including like...
All right, on to the next question in the back.
I have a bit of a comment and a bit of a Cornwall history. My grandmother's dear friends lived at the top of the valley here, Marion. They're redoing their house right now. The first things they did, she passed, was level the beautiful forsythia, clumps of forsythia that she loved so dearly. She lived a very measured, simple, humble life. I guess I just feel like high-speed anything is not always that great. Like a chainsaw is high speed. You can cut down a beautiful tree in a matter of minutes. You know, to just give pause to the commodity that is Cornwall, which is nature and beauty. And Marion told me once, and I remember it as clear as a bell, she was my grandmother's best friend. She'd call her on the rotary dial, tell her, you know, if there was a car going down Valley Road. She told me once, we have to be stewards of the land. So I'm just curious about the environmental impact to nature, the birds, when they're landing on these antennas. I mean, I care actually, you know, to know about how it's affecting the animals out there. It's why people, this is their biggest commodity. there's so few natural spaces left in the world. Don't you think it's something to hold on to a little tightly? And that's just my comment.
I'd say we're not in a hurry, but I think it also has to be a community discussion, which is why we're starting here with trying to figure out some of these things. And again, we're very lucky to have people come here who spent a lot of time thinking about different aspects of the issue. Kate in the back.
I just wanted to give a shout out for different densities in town. We do have people who live far apart from each other, but there's a little close density within, for instance, the village. On my Wi-Fi, when I beam up my connection, I've got 8 people with stronger connections than I do in my own house with I have an old-fashioned connection, but it's my connection 6 feet away from my computer is way down on the list. And it's because people are on their own are getting higher, stronger, faster things. And my house is getting bombarded. So I'm just putting it out there. I'm concerned.
Thank you for being concerned. I think we're probably one of the few towns that are actually calling up the public utility people and asking what are these boxes about. I don't think many other places are taking these concerns as seriously as we do here. Yes, Brian.
My understanding from the presentation is that the installation of 5G town-wide would involve a substantial infrastructure cost, and that the private utilities and the private sector are not willing to pony up to that cost. So the community itself will have to find the money to fund the infrastructure. I know we have an infrastructure funding issue in West Cornwall now for a proposed sewer system, and one of the issues that surfaced, will the users pay for that infrastructure cost, or will the whole town pay for it per capita? And I'm wondering, in this case, will we have a similar issue?
That's a very good question, yes. I'm sure we're going to have people that down the road don't want any part of an upgrade, and there are going to be people that want to have an upgrade. So stay tuned. I mean, it's not going to be decided tonight. And I think the effects of lack of infrastructure are making themselves manifested in West Cornwall pretty obviously right now.
In Washington, they have decided to divide who pays for it with their one initiative right now. They have made the high-speed internet for free to everyone, every business that's right in the center of Washington Depot. And then Selectman Lyons has put together a group of people to build what's called an innovation lab to attract some people to come in to maybe start some businesses. And he will be building into the rent for the people that participate in the innovation lab a little higher charge for the high-speed internet. There are almost as many different financing possibilities as there are towns in America that are trying it. And so starting the conversation now and thinking about these and thinking about them in the context of being roads of a different sort, but roads, is a way to look at this, understanding that it does cost money.
Yes, Ann?
Yeah, I want to ask Professor Carpenter about the effect health-wise on animals. You talked about people, how about just the earth and maybe perhaps even plants?
I'm really not an expert on that subject. I know there's a large literature on effects on animals. There are studies from Europe that attribute the decline of bees to the fact that their navigation system is perturbed by these radio frequency fields. There's a tendency for everybody to blame their particular thing. I tend to think that pesticide use, excessive pesticide use, is probably more of a factor in the decline of bees than the radio frequency radiation, but they probably both add to that. There are other studies that have shown death of plants close to generating facilities, but again, I'm really not an expert on that subject. Sorry.
In the back.
This isn't as much a question as it is maybe some advice to the town and the people who are responsible for the community members. When you're putting up devices, no matter who's putting them up, you want to make sure that they're not allowed to change to the next device. I think that was mentioned. If you have a 4G now and you want to put up a 5G, they should be required to come back to the town and get approval for that. And part of the reason is there's a rush to put in 5G because that's going to answer everything. That's going to be the wonder. You know, it's like everything else that we always rush into. The problem with 5G, NOAA, that does all of our weather predictions, has already said 5G is going to cause problems when we go to predict weather because of the interference that frequency is going to cause throughout the world, throughout the United States, throughout the world, that 5G. It also has the potential to cause a problem for you to change the channel on your television because it's going to affect the interference of your little transmitter that does your remote control to your television. It could affect other people. If you have a 5G next to somebody with a smaller Wi-Fi signal in their house, it could create so much interference that their own personal devices may never work again. So the town has to really be prepared when somebody comes along and promises you the greatest thing in the world. And if you ever want to watch a good program, watch Last Week Tonight by John Oliver and find out about a thing called, for medical devices, whether it's FDA approved or FDA cleared. If it's approved, it's gone through all the stringent things. If it's approved, it's all the important work has been done to verify that it's correct. If it's cleared, it's kind of like, well, it's based on a different kind of standard. And he did a thing about hip replacements. And there was like, he showed that there was like 40 or 50 previous hip replacement things. I know you're looking at your watch. Yeah. It's important. And one of the devices that got approved was a metal-on-metal hip replacement. And it has caused nothing but problems for the people who have that in their bodies. Okay. They just turn into mush inside because metal-on-metal doesn't work. So be sure, as a town administrator, that you are getting good information before you let somebody come in and promise you the world.
Okay, sure.
You know, I think you touched on a very important point, and he and I don't agree on many things, but we do agree on this one. There is a move in Washington right now to take away all ability of local people, towns, cities, to oppose the implementation of this technology. And that actually goes back to 1996 Federal Communication Act, which prohibited communities or individuals from opposing the placement of cell towers, 3G and 4G cell towers, based on health effects. You could oppose them because they were ugly, because they decreased property values, but not because they were dangerous to health. You know, it's almost, unless people work with their elected representatives in Congress, and I mean in Washington, any ability for local communities to object to not only the original placement of a mini tower, but its upgrade over many years to stronger and stronger, and in my view, more hazardous generators, is going to be taken away from communities. So this is a very serious question. And I gather Connecticut has some regulation giving local communities some authority right now. Washington can take that away in a minute. And in fact, Most utility companies would tell you that local communities don't have any authority to oppose these placements on the basis of the 1996 Act.
Okay, yes, Meg.
Thank you, Gordon. Hi, Meg. A question, thank you, everybody. You know, a lot of this is future, fiber optic, do we do it, how do we pay for it? I see still that there are two issues. And the one issue about the small cells that Brad and I discovered back in March with the Optimum trucks, stringing them up along, Optimum told us that they belong to Sprint. Okay, we now still have that issue as a town. We have multiple ones along the Valley Road. We go under 10 from Dudleytown to get to the town hall that are irradiating 24/7 with no benefit to the town. No benefit along Valley Road. My question number one, is I'm not hearing anything about have you contacted Sprint and what is this about? Because this is an issue that's not going away. So as a community, how do we address this? We have a couple of people in the audience tonight that they are having 24/7 right into their windows, bedroom windows. This is not good. Now, so how do we address this? My second issue is fiber optic, great, broadband, faster, better, you know. I'm very happy, as I think a lot of people are, with Optimum. How do we get the 30 or the 40% of Cornwallians who don't have the cable? You know, I'm practical. How do we perhaps spend the money to help those people get connected? And instead of starting from scrap, let's, you know, hear from people who want to get connected. And what do we do about these small cells? Have you called Sprint? Has anybody called Sprint?
First, as I said earlier, we did talk to the people that actually regulate the small cells, and we talked to the commissioner there, and he's trying to find out exactly who those people are. I do not have a hotline to Sprint, but we will find out fairly soon whose devices they are, what devices they are, and then we will find out if the regulatory obligations of those people were followed. So I think that's that's the path we're taking, trying to find out what's going on with those units.
Second question?
Second question, Optimum. I'm not sure. I think that the town is pretty well wired with Optimum. At this point, I think there's very few roads that do not have cable on them, as far as I know. The town, unlike other towns, this town is pretty well wired for cable.
Good.
Yes, we'll go second round, Blake.
Partly to address Dan, the issue of radio frequency interference was brought up. Just so you know, when I drive through Washington Depot, what they've got going now with town-wide Wi-Fi is whiting out my FM radio signal in the car. So they've already got an RFI problem there that they probably don't even understand. But really, what I was hoping that David would address the difference between industry-funded studies versus independent studies, and what are the ratios of positive to negative findings in the science, depending on funding.
Well, I have, there are a number of reports of radio frequency radiation health studies that report that industry-funded studies find little or no adverse health effects, whereas government or private foundation-funded studies do find such health effects. I've just done a similar study on the power line electricity magnetic fields, and there's been evidence since the late 1970s that elevated magnetic fields in homes increases the risk of leukemia in children. I've looked at studies published since 1980 on that subject, because in 1980 there were 4 large reviews that all concluded that there was an elevated, small but statistically significant elevation in risk of childhood leukemia in relation to magnetic fields. What I found in my studies, I grouped them in 3 groups. Those studies that report a statistically significant elevation in childhood leukemia, all funded by government. One was partially funded by EPRI, which is Electric Power Research Institute. I looked at a group of studies that showed an elevated risk of childhood leukemia, but it didn't quite reach statistical significance, all funded by government and private foundations. I looked at the other studies that did not find either a statistical significant association or even a suggestion of association. All were funded by the industry. So when you look at a scientific report, look to see who funded it. There is a misperception in the press that the information on childhood leukemia and magnetic field exposure is inconsistent. It's not inconsistent if you identify the source of funding.
Thank you.
Okay, 2 more questions and that will be it. Yes?
So, you as the chief elected official, we have in-town school, we have 2 libraries, we have a child care center. Throughout the world, it is starting where municipalities, educational centers, they're restricting the use of Wi-Fi. They're mandating that Wi-Fi become wired. Children are very susceptible, fragile receptors. Their skulls are very soft developmentally. Through exposure to these emitting entities, these emitting hardware, there are plenty of studies that already show adverse health effects. But if you're not familiar with them, then I need to ask you to err on the side of caution and pull in the precautionary principle. If there is enough evidence, even though it's not 100% evidence of potential for harm, that you need to err on the side of caution and make certain that all of the facilities where children are in this town, that everything be hardwired. And that should happen rapidly.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
What about you commenting to what I just said?
I haven't thought that through. I know just sitting here, people are using their cell phones, so I think it's unrealistic to think that every town facility is going to be hardwired and not have a modem or an access to Wi-Fi. I mean, I don't carry a cell phone all the time myself. I appreciate Dr. Carpenter's concerns. I listened to what he had to say tonight, but I also am aware of a general way the world is going, and I don't think there's many schools around here or there's many libraries that don't allow people to have cell phone use. So that's off the top of my head, and again, I haven't thought it through. Yes?
Just a few comments. I work at a school in New York City. We were pro-Wi-Fi in the beginning, and the tech director was pro-Wi-Fi, everything. And because of these new studies, the younger kids now, they're cutting off Wi-Fi and not having it for the younger kids, 4, 5, 6, and they've determined that these adverse health benefits outweigh the risk. But anyway, that's like a side point. But the thing I wanted to say is that Senator Blumenthal actually has an initiative that you can look up, and he had a hearing with the companies putting up these small cell towers, mini cell, and he asked them about the 5G rollout, being careful about the 5G rollout, and he asked them if they had any studies about it, or they said no. I mean, you could watch the hearing, but it's interesting. He wants more information before they do the 5G rollout. And he was saying that what's going to happen is what both of the speakers were saying is that once those small cells get up and not that nobody fights them, that it's gonna be a precursor to 5G. But then my final question is, I don't understand why they could wire using regular broadband, and why it's going to be prohibitively expensive for people like Optimum to do fiber optic as compared to broadband, to wire it. Like, I know it's cheaper for them to wire to the driveway and then blast with small cells because they're going to make more money that way. They don't have to wire to every home. But But is it actually true that is it actually true that, they're gonna do what's cost effective for them, they're gonna do what they can make the most money doing, but why wouldn't they do just what they did before, which is the cabling? Like, why is that so cost prohibitive to cable to a home in this area when the cable wasn't? Why is fiber optic so prohibitively expensive?
There are technical answers to that question and there are business answers to that question. The business answers are probably more meaningful. The infrastructure that's been installed is essentially been stopped, at least in rural areas. I know that, for example, we are at 600 megahertz as the top frequency on the cable line. If it's in Hartford, it's 750 megahertz. If it's in San Francisco, it's a gigahertz. That's all infrastructure changes, not the last piece going into the house, but getting closer to the house with fiber optics so they can get more capacity on the last line going into the house. But Comcast and Charter, and I believe Charter is Optimum. Is Charter Optimum or Cablevision?
Charter's Cablevision.
Huh?
Charter's Cablevision.
Charter's Optimum?
No.
Or Spectrum?
Yes.
Charter Spectrum?
Yeah, it's Cablevision.
Anyway, the Charter and Comcast have about 80% of the U.S. Mobile cable TV market. And they're at a wall. I mean, cable subscriptions are down. They've wired everybody up that can wire up. And so they're looking for the next game, and the next game for them is fiber, is 5G. Comcast has a 5G program, but they're using the Verizon network. And they've got 18,000 Wi-Fi boxes on poles around the country. And that's sort of a hybrid. They still got everything they want to do with the Wi-Fi works as well as the stuff in the Wi-Fi. They need another revenue stream, and it's going to come from wireless. That means that the wired solution, there's no electromagnetic radiation from a piece of fiber. It's all wired. There's no electric. There might be some actually from a cable, but and there's a significant amount from the phone system. But when you've got light going back and forth, there's no electromagnetic radiation. But they can't afford, without the customer paying for it, to go from what they now have to homes that aren't connected. And so in my community, they might charge $100,000 or $150,000 to go up a quarter-mile road. And you just say, no, I'll live with DSL. I'm okay with DSL. And even on my street, which is a major road, 272, there are people on it that can't get cable TV without spending a lot of money. And it's basically because they don't want to be in the business. It's not what they want to be doing now. They want to move to something, the next thing. Over time, they will have to put fiber into the home because the speeds will require it, and their network will fall over without it. But that's probably 20 years from now. 75% of the current internet traffic is video. HD video takes 7 megabits per second per stream. Standard cable television is 1.5 megabits per stream. YouTube is probably less than that. We don't need a gigabit. We just don't need it right now. But when we start looking at telemedicine machines that create enormous files, and we need to upload something, and we can't take 23 hours to do it, it has to happen instantly. So over time, over the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to see the demand for speed go up and up and up and up and up, but not from what we do today. What we do today, we don't need anything besides what we can have from cable television.
So we don't need high speed then? We don't need high speed then? Is that...
I have 250 megabits in my house. I probably use, I don't know, nothing like it. The upstream, most people in our communities who have cable television will be happy for a long time with what they've got. The question for the communities really is not you who have it, but those who don't. I mean, we don't ask everybody, we ask everybody to pay for the schools. I have a big tax bill in Norfolk. My kids have raised in California, they're 50 years old now, they have to go to school. It's a community obligation to take the next step. And the next sensible step is a wired network to the home that doesn't have any electromagnetic radiation. Now, if you put it in, one of the pieces of paper back there is on 5G. I make the note at the very bottom, because I don't believe you can do a network here without the community paying for some of it. But there are revenue opportunities within it. And one of them is to go to the 4 major carriers and say, we're going to put up enough dark fiber when we do a fiber so that you can bring in your antennas and we will lease the fiber to you. You won't get enough money back doing that to pay for it, but there'll be some revenue coming back. And all of a sudden, you have complete control. You put it where we want you to put it, not where you want to put it. You're going to use our wiring because you can't do it otherwise. The cost of the system is all in the fiber, not in the antennas. Well, not really, but so if you, Cornwall, Norfolk, any of us, say to ourselves, let's do it. We put the wire on the poles, not that expensive. And we go to Crown Castle, we go to Frontier, well, not Frontier, but we go to AT&T and Verizon and say, look, here we are. We got the most expensive part done. You want to be in the rural communities? You want to be a hero? You want to be something that would get your everybody excited? And we'll give it to you for X dollars per month. Now you got the best of both worlds. Because you can now chart things out so that the areas that are really sparse for going out of town where there's nobody at all, you do it with antennas. You don't connect to the home. In areas where you have greater home, you do it right to the home. And you have a hybrid system that will do everything, but you have complete control over it, complete control. Put the wire on the poles, you determine your future. If you don't put the wire on the poles, the future's going to happen, and all these questions will be answered by someone else.
Okay, well anyway, that's it, answering your own questions. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and thanks to everybody showing up and our speakers.